Once upon a time, in the bustling but modest neighborhood of Iyana Ipaja, Lagos, a young woman named Tomiwa lived with her father, Mr. Oluwaseun, and her stepmother Ngozi. Theirs was a house filled with polite silence rather than warmth. Tomiwa's mother had passed away when she was just 12, and the vacuum left behind had never quite been filled, despite her father's best efforts. When he married Ngozi a few years later, Tomiwa hoped for some semblance of maternal love to return, but instead she found only strangeness cloaked in elegance. Ngozi was beautiful, articulate, and always immaculately dressed. Yet beneath the surface of her grace, something didn't sit right. Her smiles felt too polished. Her laughter didn't reach her eyes. Most peculiar of all was the large, ancient-looking gold ring she always wore, its blood-red gemstone catching light even when there was none. She never took it off, not even to sleep or bathe. When Tomiwa once asked about it, Ngozi replied with a gentle but distant tone, "It's an old family charm. It brings blessings." But it was more than that. Tomiwa could feel it. Soon after Ngozi's arrival, the family's fortunes shifted. Her father, a civil servant who had long struggled with bureaucratic stagnation, began to rise rapidly. His business side hustles, which had always limped along, suddenly flourished. They moved into a better house. Their once modest car was replaced with a sleek imported one. Friends whispered in admiration, but in the quiet corners of their new home, unease brewed. Tomiwa began to notice oddities. The lights would flicker at night, even during NEPA supply. Whispers echoed from Ngozi's room, sometimes in a language Tomiwa didn't understand. Shadows would stretch longer than they should, and mirrors sometimes reflected things not quite in sync with reality. And more chilling still, she would wake up with bruises she couldn't explain, or with the distinct sensation of fingers brushing her skin as she slept. Still early in her university years, Tomiwa tried to rationalize the strange occurrences as stress or coincidence. But her suspicions deepened when she overheard an argument between her father and Ngozi late one night. Her father's voice trembled with guilt and fear. "We agreed there'd be no more deaths, Ngozi." "It's enough." Ngozi's response, low and laced with menace, was terrifying in its finality. "You knew the deal. There is no wealth without offering. If we stop now, it all comes crashing down." That night, something broke inside Tomiwa. This wasn't just superstition. Something truly evil was tethered to her stepmother, and that infernal ring was at the center of it. She began to watch, to listen, to investigate. Tomiwa's first stop was the family's longtime maid, Amaka, a reserved woman who had served the household since before her mother's death. Amaka had grown increasingly withdrawn over the years, her gaze often shifting nervously when speaking about the house or Ngozi. One afternoon, as they sat outside near the backyard tap, Tomiwa carefully brought up her stepmother's ring. Amaka's eyes widened, and she clutched her rosary beads tightly. "I hear her talking to someone in that room," Amaka whispered, her voice barely audible over the chirp of cicadas. "But she's always alone. Sometimes the voices answer back." Tomiwa shivered. "Have you seen anything?" Amaka nodded, hesitant. "Once I brought her tea early in the morning. The door was ajar and I swear I saw a shadow standing behind her. But when I entered, it disappeared. It was tall and it had no face." That night, Tomiwa couldn't sleep. The images haunted her. She began searching online for anything about cursed rings or spiritual charms in Yoruba and Igbo folklore. The descriptions she found, rings linked to wealth through ancestral spirits or demonic pacts, were disturbingly similar to Ngozi's. Unable to rely on internet myths alone, Tomiwa reached out to Professor Ajibade, a retired lecturer in African history and religious traditions who had taught briefly at her university. Under the pretense of a research project, she described the ring and the strange occurrences. The professor grew visibly uneasy, requesting they speak in private. "You've described what may be one of the rings of Eru Aye," he said, lowering his voice. "It's no mere relic. It's an object of spiritual bondage. These rings are said to originate from an old cult, Aso Ajogun, a secret society known for making blood pacts with spirits in exchange for prosperity. The ring connects its bearer to a spirit of the underworld, and in return for wealth and success, it demands sacrifice. Blood, sacrifice." Tomiwa's breath caught in her throat. "And if someone breaks the pact? The consequences are devastating," the professor warned. "There are stories of entire families vanishing, of madness and torment. If your stepmother wears such a ring, your family is already entangled in it. But be careful, these spirits are ancient and cunning. The ring doesn't just belong to its wearer. It chooses, and once it marks you, it doesn't let go easily." This revelation turned Tomiwa's suspicion into dread. Everything suddenly clicked: the timing of her mother's death, the immediate improvement in her father's fortunes, the way Ngozi arrived almost as if summoned. Could her mother have been the first sacrifice? The question of her mother's death now haunted Tomiwa with sharpened clarity. Though her father had always claimed it was a sudden illness, Tomiwa began to re-examine the past. Her mother, Tola, had fallen sick swiftly. One day vibrant and full of life, the next bedridden with no clear diagnosis. The hospitals found nothing conclusive, and within a week she was gone. Her father never spoke much about it afterward. Now, armed with the professor's warning, Tomiwa suspected foul play. Had her mother been the price for Ngozi's entry into the family and the beginning of their wealth? One night, unable to bear the weight of her thoughts, she confronted her father. The confrontation was raw, the air heavy with years of suppressed grief. Mr. Oluwaseun, shaken and tearful, confessed that he had been approached by a strange group after Tola's death, men in white agbadas with strange markings, led by a woman who promised to stabilize his life and elevate his destiny. That woman was Ngozi. "I didn't know how deep it would go," he whispered. His voice cracked. I was desperate. We were drowning. I thought she was just a spiritual guide. By the time I understood, I was already bound." He confirmed Tomiwa's worst fear. Her mother had indeed been the initial sacrifice, chosen not by him, but as part of the ring's requirement for acceptance. Ngozi had orchestrated everything. Racked with rage and heartbreak, Tomiwa vowed to end the cycle. But how does one destroy a curse without becoming a part of it? She returned to Professor Ajibade for guidance, and he gave her one final warning. "You cannot just take the ring. It is sentient. It protects itself. If you want to end its power, you must find the source where Ngozi was initiated, destroy the shrine, sever the bond from the root." Armed with a clue, an old photo she stole from Ngozi's locked drawer showing a grove with markings and strange symbols, Tomiwa began her journey into Nigeria's mystical underbelly. She traveled to Anambra State, to a village called Umuiz, the place etched on the back of the photograph. What she found there chilled her to the bone. Umuiz was unlike any village Tomiwa had visited. Tucked deep within the forested folds of southeastern Nigeria, it seemed untouched by time. The air was thick with heat and the scent of ancient trees. The villagers were wary of outsiders, their eyes following Tomiwa as she walked the dusty roads. When she showed the photograph to one old man, his face darkened. He crossed himself and spat into the dirt. "You shouldn't be here," he warned. "That place is cursed." Eventually, a young woman named Adaizi took pity on Tomiwa and revealed the grove's location, a place the locals called Enso Aja, the forbidden ground. No one went there anymore. Strange disappearances, ghostly sightings, and inexplicable misfortunes had plagued the community for years. But the brave or desperate few who wandered into Enso Aja were either never seen again or returned half-mad. That night, Tomiwa ventured into the grove. The trees grew twisted and unnaturally tall, their branches forming a canopy that blotted out the moon. The deeper she went, the colder it became. Her torchlight flickered violently as whispers seemed to crawl through the trees, speaking her name in voices too familiar to be real. her mother's, Amaka's, even her own. At the grove's center stood an ancient shrine built of dark stones, its base adorned with rusted manacles and bones. The same symbol etched on Ngozi's ring was carved into the stone, an eye inside a flame bleeding. Tomiwa poured the kerosene she had brought in a gourd and set the shrine ablaze. The fire roared unnaturally high, the wind howling as if in protest. She heard screams, not just from her own mouth but from the very earth. Something was fighting back. As the shrine burned, a tremor ripped through the ground. Faces appeared in the smoke, faces twisted in agony, bearing the likeness of those sacrificed, and among them, Tomiwa saw her mother. Tola's ghostly image smiled faintly before vanishing into the wind. The fire died down suddenly, leaving behind only scorched earth and silence. Back in Lagos, the effects were immediate. Ngozi fell gravely ill, her beauty wasting away overnight. Her ring, once vibrant, now dulled and cracked. When Tomiwa returned home, she found Ngozi raving, scratching at her own skin, claiming spirits were clawing at her from within. No doctor could explain her condition. One morning, Ngozi vanished, disappeared from her locked room without a trace. The police were baffled, but Tomiwa knew the bond was broken, and the spirit that had fed off Ngozi for years had finally claimed her soul. In the weeks following Ngozi's disappearance, life in the Oluwaseun household changed dramatically. The once unshakable flow of wealth ebbed quickly. Business contracts were revoked. Bank accounts were frozen due to legal complications, and the car that had long been a symbol of their sudden success was repossessed. It was as though the spirit, now banished, had taken back every false blessing it had given. But despite the loss of comfort and status, Tomiwa and her father found a strange sense of peace. The house was quieter, less suffocating. Tomiwa resumed her studies with renewed clarity. Her father, stripped of illusions, returned to honest civil work, earning less but sleeping better at night. Amaka, ever faithful, remained in the house and even began praying aloud again, something she hadn't done since Ngozi arrived. Still, the experience left scars. Tomiwa couldn't look at mirrors the same way. Her dreams remained restless, sometimes echoing with distant whispers from the grove. Occasionally, she'd feel a cold draft or see flickers in her periphery, but she told herself it was imagination. The ring, after all, was gone, or so she hoped. Then, one Harmattan morning, a parcel arrived at their gate. There was no return address. Inside was a small charred box. Tomiwa opened it cautiously, and there it lay, Ngozi's ring. The gemstone was now cracked straight down the center, oozing a faint dark stain like dry blood. But the metal shimmered faintly under the sun. Tomiwa stared at it for a long time, her heart pounding. Something deep within her whispered a warning and a temptation. She burned the box and its contents that night behind the compound. But as the flames consumed the cursed object, she heard a faint sigh on the wind. Whether it was relief or resentment, she could never be sure. Years later, Tomiwa would become a woman of quiet strength. She never married, never had children. She lived modestly and worked with young women at a counseling center in Surulere, helping them navigate the harsh realities of life. But the events of that year never left her. And every so often, when a young girl walked in wearing an antique ring with a blood-red stone, Tomiwa's blood would run cold. Because some curses once born do not die, they wait. They wait for the next hand to wear them.